I want to welcome you to this event for Robotics Ed Week. We're super excited to have you join us here. We are in aquatics research, aquatics robotics research. Sorry about that. It is 9 a.m. and we can go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and send it to our presenters.
Cool. Let me just make sure that I can share my screen. Maybe Chris, do you want to start introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Desmond. I work at the Robotics and Meta Systems Lab at Isabel. We work primarily on information gathering for robotics, and we're going to talk about different things that underwater robots can do and ways they can help in research. Primarily, we work on the robotics side, but we also work with biologists who are interested in studying different aspects of lakes. So we'll talk about that at the end as well.
Yeah. My name is Isabel. I am a third-year PhD student at USC. Chris and I, like you mentioned, work on aquatic robotics research. So we just want to give you guys kind of like an overview of what that means and what is possible in this space. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, feel free to ask those in the chat or the Q&A section, and Chris and I will do our best to answer those questions as we go. And then we'll also have time at the end for any more general questions or if anything you want to talk more about. Cool. So I'll get started. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And just to start off, this is a picture of otters, was it? That Chris took at one of the deployment ones, so they're just cute. So we'll start out by talking about what aquatic robots can do, and there's a lot of different applications. And one of the really kind of broad ones is studying marine habitats, and this can be a wide variety of things. One specific example shown here is coral reefs that are maybe changing because of maybe the coral is dying or animals are migrating or something like that. Scientists will want to know how they change, take samples, take pictures, and in some cases, like you can see here, they'll actually deploy robots to repopulate the coral with little like baby coral. And this is something that's a really good application for robots to do because they can be very precise in how they move and do these repetitive tasks of placing little coral pieces, for example, like over and over again without getting tired. Another one is studying and monitoring sharks. So sharks are, well, obviously dangerous to be around. So robots are a pretty good alternative to sending a person down to be very close to a shark. They move very fast also, and they're in a portion of the ocean that's kind of hard to put static sensors or other things. So robots are a really good option for scientists to send down to study these animals in a safe way. And another set of animals that are difficult for people to study in person are animals that live really deep in the sea. So the deeper you go, the higher the pressure of the water, and the more difficult it is for people to be able to stay at that depth and stay there safely. So in the very deep sea, there are a lot of animals that scientists don't even know exist yet, that haven't been discovered or haven't been studied very much. And so this is a really interesting part for biologists to learn about. And so sending down an aquatic robot is a really good option for these scientists to learn more about these animals and maybe not have to worry so much about keeping the robot at a specific pressure because there are no humans in there that need a specific pressure to breathe or survive. And so they can follow animals or take pictures at these very deep depths. Okay, so another application is studying wrecks. So if any of you have seen a shipwreck in an ocean, maybe in a video or something, you can sometimes see that they've got a lot of broken parts sticking out. Maybe a lot of animals or other sea creatures have kind of made their home in these places, and it can be scary or dangerous or just kind of complicated to get down and to see these wrecks. So robots are another good option for this. They can move through these wrecks and study them, take pictures, and bring them back up to people on the shore without having to actually send people down and maybe get stuck in the wrecks themselves. Some of these are really important for like historical reasons, but also one example is just that one of the shipwrecks from 300 years ago, for example, had just a ton of bronze cannons, and this was a very valuable thing. And not just ships, but also planes have crashed into the ocean, and so these are two different kinds of wrecks that are important to study, and robots can be used to do that. Okay, and so then kind of on a different section is pollution. So microplastics are formed when plastics that have ended up in the ocean, usually from human trash like bottles or even clothes, they break up into tiny pieces over time. And these are like really, really microscopic pieces, and these are called microplastics. So,
Hey.
Hi, do you have a question? Okay, if you have a question, you can write it in the chat box, or otherwise you can raise your hand too. So microplastics are polluting the oceans every day, and they're not really well understood. We don't know what effects they have on everything, like the animals that live there and us who are drinking the water. So this is something that we want to clean up from the ocean, and robots are deployed for this. They can send out little like nets and pick up the microplastics as they move through the water. And here are some pictures of a robot with one of these little filter nets. And another thing in climate science is that getting data from all over the world is an important part of understanding how climate change is progressing throughout, not just one area, but the entire world, and how these parts influence each other. And this graph here on the left shows you each of these points is one robot called an Argofloat, and they're distributed throughout the entire world, all the oceans, and they're actually shared throughout the world by multiple countries. So here's a list of the countries that participate in this. And so the nice thing about this is that all the data that the Argofloats get from floating around in the ocean and collecting measurements is actually shared with scientists across the globe. And so this is a really neat way for scientists everywhere to share information and to share what they've learned to make better models and predictions about what is changing in the ocean and how that affects other climate change in the air and on land. And so this is a really, really valuable program. And this is also important because some other parts of climate information, like things that we can get from satellites, for example, pictures from space of the Earth's surface, can also give us important information, but it's only, what you see from above, it's only a surface level set of information, whereas the Argofloats can give you information about what's inside the ocean underneath the surface. And this picture here on the bottom is a picture of where Argofloats are currently. So this is Los Angeles, And you can see there's just a small picture of what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay. So under ice exploration is a really cool part of aquatic robotics too. So exploring under ice is useful on Earth, but it's actually also really useful for space exploration. And so I think this is a really interesting application of aquatic robots. Going under ice is very dangerous for people. And so you see this like theme of we send robots where it's dangerous for people to go. Because even though a robot could, cost hundreds of thousands or maybe like $1 million, at least it's, if something happens to it, it's just a robot, it can be replaced. Whereas like a person going into a dangerous situation is a lot more worrying. And so this is another extension of that, where we send robots into places like under the ice, where if something goes wrong, the human might not be able to make it back to the hole and out of the surface, but the robot will kind of stay there. We can maybe get it out and maybe not, but either way, it's okay. And so the robots under the ice can give us information from places that are hard to get to, and also, for example, NASA mission in the future might want to send a robot to the icy moons of Jupiter. So scientists believe that Jupiter's moons have this really thick icy cap, and then underneath they might have a water ocean. And they're not really sure what this looks like or what the environment's like. And so one option is to send a lander that has an aquatic robot underneath or inside of it, and it'll send it down through a crack in the ice crust, and then let the robot from there explore underneath the ice and send back information through a relay back to Earth. And so this is something that hasn't been done yet, but it's in kind of in the works. It might happen in the near future, and would be a really cool application of this. Okay, and so one application on Earth of being in near ice or ice water is mapping icebergs. So again, with climate change, one of the big things that tells us about what's happening in the world is how icebergs' shape or size changes over time. This tells us if the water is cooling or heating around it, and maybe some impact that has on the other parts of the world nearby. And so this is kind of hard to do for humans, maybe in a boat. It might be dangerous for a boat to get close because you don't really know the size of the iceberg underneath. But also the icebergs are kind of constantly moving, and so keeping up with them can also be a difficult task. A robot underneath the water can follow this using its sensors to be at a certain distance and track where it's moving. And so here's a picture, a little graph of how these, how the robot moved around the iceberg. So this black line is like the path that it took, and you can see it kind of went in spirals around the sides of the iceberg. And this map here is the surface that it sensed as it went around. And the coloring is just the depth. The orange part is the deeper part of the iceberg. And one interesting thing about this one is that they actually discovered something they didn't realize, which was that this iceberg had like a cave inside of it, and the robot went inside and discovered this all by itself, and came out a few hours later, having discovered this kind of cave inside the iceberg. So yeah, this is a pretty cool application. Okay, and another thing that robots can do to help with weather prediction is predicting hurricanes. So hurricanes are becoming more common, unfortunately, and scientists don't always know when they are going to happen, but some measurements can give them a better idea of, like, this seems like it could become a hurricane, or like, actually the conditions in the sea right now don't really seem like they would be productive to a hurricane. So using different information, mostly about temperature of the water and the salinity of the water. Salinity is the amount of salt in the water, so high salinity is a lot of salt. So given these two factors, which robots in the water can sense, they can send this information back to scientists and climate scientists who can use that information to warn people on Earth, on land, if they think that hurricanes are likely to happen. And knowing this ahead of time can obviously help save lives by evacuating people early if they need to, or other types of emergency action. Okay. And so one other one that is a pretty good example of a dangerous situation is removing old mines. So mines look like this. If you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo, you might remember they have a scene in that movie where they have to navigate these mines. And basically these were used in wartime to deter ships from coming near these areas of the water, because they'll explode if something comes near them and touches them. Obviously a very dangerous thing that you don't really want people near. And so robots can be deployed to safely remove these from the water, since they're not really useful for anything right now. Okay, I see a question that says, so far everything mentioned has all been research projects. What about private sector businesses? Where are aquabots being used now? Welding or military uses? Yeah, so a lot of these, so a lot of these things are research based. Businesses are definitely involved in ocean science. I don't know of any names of businesses off the top of my head. Chris, if you do, you can feel free to jump in. But there are companies exist, for example, for cleaning up the ocean. These types of things have a lot of kind of startups in this area, where they'll deploy robots with nets or deploy robots with some kind of filter inside of them to clean up the ocean. This is one area that I know other private sector businesses exist, for example.
Yeah, the primary use, I think, of these underwater robots in sort of business pure sector is deep water oil inspection and submerged oil pictures. The Norwegian university that does a lot of this underwater research has an actual test field of an entirely submerged oil rig that's entirely monitored by autonomous underwater robots. It's a lot of times when businesses have a deep sea need, it's on a fixed structure. And so you usually can do it by moving the robot on a tether. But there are some where they want to autonomously find new things, like new drilling locations that they will use these robots for. And there are a lot of military uses. One thing that they're being used for right now is they mount underwater microphones on them, and then they use them to detect if there are ships nearby that aren't broadcasting the proper signals they need to broadcast. Which probably means either they've forgotten to turn it on or they're doing something illegal. So that's a really common use for these robots. And I think the port of LA actually uses a few of these for sort of autonomous scanning, and they use them in ports that have a lot of smuggling and illegal goods coming into them.
Thanks.
Oh, also in fisheries monitoring, that's a huge thing. If you have an oyster growing operation, they use a lot of underwater robots for that, to monitor those.
Cool. Okay. So to wrap up this part of the talk, one of the other applications that is what Chris and I work on is monitoring algae in lakes. And so basically, algae blooms can grow in these lakes, lakes that have fish, maybe that people drink out of, that other wildlife depend on for drinking water. And algae can grow and kind of take over in some of these lakes and poison the water, basically. And obviously this can be harmful to the fish that live there, but also if people swim in the lakes, it can be harmful to those people, or if you drink the water, or other wildlife could be poisoned or die because of this algae bloom. And so scientists are really interested in monitoring these, knowing when they kind of flare up, when they're safer to be around. And doing this by hand can be difficult. So you have to go out to the lake, which can be very big, and take samples, like go out and actually pick up a cup of water from a part of the lake, take it back to the lab, analyze it, and then you can maybe do that in a few spots in the lake, and then you have to make a judgment based on that for the entire lake, which can be a difficult thing to do, very time intensive and very expensive. So one alternative to doing this all by hand with people in boats is to send out a robot to do this for you, or at least help you do it. And so this is what Chris and I do. We try to monitor the algae that grows in the lakes to keep the water, well, not necessarily to keep it safer because we're just monitoring, but at least to keep the scientists up to date and be able to make decisions based on that information. And cool. So that's kind of that section. Next, we'll talk about the actual robots that can be used for these different tasks. Because as you saw, there's like a huge variety of tasks that can be done. And so there's a bit of variety of the actual robots that do them as well. Okay, so the first type, which is pretty common, is the torpedo type. So this one up on the left is, with USC on it, is the one that our lab at USC has. It's called an eco mapper here in the middle. And so these torpedo types are kind of long tube-shaped ones. They're of different sizes. So the one that we have is like a few feet long, maybe about 4 feet. And then there are some bigger ones and some smaller ones. So this one is a lot bigger. I guess you can't really tell in the picture. But this one on the bottom, it's like you can see it's being moved by a crane. So it's like quite large. And these ones can glide very easily. They're very aerodynamic. So in the liquid, they're going to be able to move pretty fast. And they have sensors in the front or throughout the body. And in the back, they have their propulsion mechanism. Another type is the glider. And so the glider is designed to be very energy efficient. And here's a nice image or video of it moving through the water. The wings on it, which were not present on the ones that we saw on the previous slide, generate lift for it to actually move through the water, kind of like a plane almost. And it uses like this inflatable bladder to help it change how buoyant it is, how much it floats versus how much it sinks. And these last a really long time in the water, but they're not as agile. So you can't turn as quickly. You don't have as good control as other ones. But they can last, like in this picture, for example, it went across the entire ocean for 221 days. So it lasts a really long time because it can move very efficiently. And the wave glider is a different type of glider that uses waves to move itself forward. So the fins down here at the bottom will start spinning once the glider hits a wave, and then that will basically power the motor, move it forward in the water. And so this can also last a very long time in the ocean. For example, this little blurb here tells you that one of them traveled over almost 15,000 kilometers for more than a year in the Pacific Ocean. So these are good for these long-term or big distance surveys that give scientists information about about a large part of the ocean over a long period of time. Cool. So I see a question about the range. So again, this depends on the type of glider or type of robot. The gliders, as you can see, have like a very large range depending on the type. I don't know if this is the actual range that they have or if they can last much longer, but they can last like on the order of years. Whereas the torpedo types, I think, are shorter.
The ones that you guys, this page here, these torpedo ones, like yours with your USC, like, and then you have this picture of this person, kind of hard to tell, this person putting it in the water or retrieving it, one of the two. And so I was just wondering, with these robots here that you guys are using in your research, what's the range, if that is an issue, from the robot to whoever's operating it? That's what I was asking.
Yeah. So these actually don't really have a range to the operator, because generally you like load on coordinates that you want it to go to, or a program that instructs the robot what to do. So they're pretty much fully autonomous, and that's kind of a requirement in water, because you can't really send any signals when you're underwater. So that's kind of a challenge, and a thing unique to underwater robotics is that you kind of have to fully rely on the robot to really be a robot and not be controlled by a human.
So all of those are fully autonomous then?
Yeah, they sort of have to be. And then the level of autonomy can be just like go from this point to this point to this point and don't run into stuff, to some things we'll talk about later where we have sort of a smarter autonomy where they actually decide the points to go to, but you just give them a higher level goal to do sort of a survey.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is very interesting, and unfortunately at 11:40 I'm going to have to log off. I have students coming in at 11:40, so I need my Zoom. But this is great, and you guys are recording it, so it's going to be on a video somewhere that we can access later and watch.
Yes.
I'm not actually sure, but yeah, Monica.
Yes, well, we can notify you. You can email us at K12STEM1, and then we can notify you when we put different sections on YouTube, or what we decide on doing with the clips.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Very interesting.
Great.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think I'm the only person in here that's actually like not a presenter, right? Oh, no, wait, we got an Ethan in there. Ethan Chen.
No problem.
Hey,
Glad
Ethan, do you have any questions? Are you a student or are you a teacher?
I'm a student right now. I'm actually pretty interested in this topic. I saw like an MIT program on this, and I just want to learn more.
Yeah, MIT does it. MIT is that the MIT Hui project. I think some of the researchers actually talked about came out of that grad program.
Okay. Yeah, thanks guys for making it. And if you have questions, don't feel bad about jumping in. We'd love to answer any questions. So, okay. Moving on to the robot team specifically that we use. So I talked about the Eco Mapper on that first slide. So this is the robot again that we use underwater, but we also sometimes use it in conjunction with this drone we call it the egret. It's a drone that flies over and works as like a teammate to the Eco Mapper to take pictures from above of the lake. And using the information that the drone can take from above, it can basically give this information to the Eco Mapper, and it can use this to have like an idea of what the lake looks like, maybe where some parts might be more interesting versus less interesting for the robot to go and take samples of. And so the sensor that it uses is the camera, which I'll talk about a little bit later. That's usually used for agriculture, but we can use it for this application too. So this is kind of like a high level view of how this works in when we actually go out and deploy these robots. So the drone will take a picture of some distance above the lake and meanwhile the AUV is under the water taking samples as it goes through. Again, we have some scientists go out on boats and actually take physical samples. That's just taking like a scoop of water from a specific location, and that's a sample that they'll take back to the lab and analyze with more detail. And then there's also the people controlling things, or at least monitoring things from the shore. Okay, so going back to the drone camera. So if you were to take a picture from above of the lake, you would probably get something that looks like this. As you can see, everything kind of like more or less the same color with the exception of maybe these boats. There's like some splotches here, but everything's greenish. The camera on the drone, which is called a hyperspectral camera, will take something that looks a little bit more like this, kind of like neon color. And so it takes images of wavelengths of light that human eyes can't really see. So these are things that by ourselves we wouldn't be able to notice, but through a camera, they color them in a way that makes it a lot easier for people to see the differences. So now these purple splotches are really easily visible. And these are the algae spots that we're maybe more interested, whereas the black part is the water and is maybe less interesting depending on the application of what you're sending the robots in the lake for. Okay, and then talking about what Chris touched on earlier is moving around in an autonomous and intelligent way. So if you have an area of a lake that you're interested in monitoring, and you want to know about it like completely, maybe the first idea you come up with is to send the robot in a pattern that looks something like this, where it goes back and forth in something called a lawnmower pattern. And if you do this, you are basically guaranteed to cover the entire area because that's exactly what you're doing by going back and forth. But this can be a little problematic when your area gets bigger and bigger because this is very time intensive, energy intensive to do this. And so if the area gets too big, you maybe just don't have the power to do this all with the lawnmower pattern. So one thing that we try to work on is actually how can we make the robot make better decisions, maybe by itself, about where to go in the water and still get good information, but not have to go cover the entire area. To give you guys an idea, this is a lake called Clear Lake that we do a lot of our research in. It's in Northern California, or north of LA at least. And it's this little red square is a picture of what we would be able to cover if we did this lawnmower back and forth pattern in a day. And so if you wanted to do the entire lake with this, you can see that like putting the little red square over the entire lake would take many, many, many days. And that's just not feasible for a lot of reasons. One of them is the cost. It's very expensive to rent these rent research vessels. So going out to different parts of the lake and actually doing this can be really expensive, and you just a lot of times can't afford that. Or time-wise, it can take up to a month to maybe do this if you were to do it lawnmower pattern. So we want to make robots take better decisions in moving throughout the lake. And here's some field pictures. So we have some pictures. This is Chris and Arvind, who is another member of our lab, when they went, I think, a couple of years ago to deploy the robots in the real world. These are kind of fun. on pictures. And yeah, that's it for our presentation. We have, oh, great. Oh yeah, I see a question here. How can you account for variability of the water? If you mean like the waves, for example, like the flow of the water, the robot has these like propellers and let's see, where are the pictures? So you see these little fins here. It has different ways for keeping its course. So even if it gets pushed to the side, it will be able to kind of make its way back. It's not perfect, so the path that it takes will not be like a totally straight line if that's what you wanted it to do. But I think overall it has fairly good control. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so they actually have these things, like if you've ever played with the Nintendo Wii, you know, it can detect when you like swing the controller, and it does that by measuring the acceleration on the object. And so these, one of the things that makes these so expensive is that you, in these fancier ones, they essentially take very, very accurate things that can calculate what's called the acceleration on the object, and put them in there. And they're usually used for like airplanes to detect if like airplanes are going to crash. And so they're really, really, really expensive. But if you have one of those, the robot, even though it doesn't have GPS because it's underwater, can detect if it's experienced an acceleration and try to correct for the acceleration that it experienced underwater. And then some that deal with really, really heavy waves have sort of sensors running down the side of them, like a fish does. They're called, I forget what they're called in fish, but it allows the fish to detect differences in pressure on the side. And so these robots, and this is more of an experimental sort of research thing now, can sort of correct themselves based on the pressure differential along the sides of the robot, which is how fish do it.
Like, can I wait? Can I mute myself and ask questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So yeah. So I'm currently on my robotics, so I draw this like actual robots for inspiration. So I think that this is like very something very cool. I just want like it's like so going back like the MIT course I was talking about, they mentioned about like using linear algebra to predict trajectory or something like that. I'm not sure if that's like something that's part of the algorithm to do this. Can you explain further?
Yeah. So it becomes one thing that's about robotics that becomes really difficult is that even if you are on land, like if you've ever used a GPS on your phone, you'll know it's not perfectly accurate. It doesn't tell you. Sometimes it gets you on the wrong road or something like that, because it's not perfectly accurate, especially in like downtown LA.
Yeah.
And so we use these algorithms to try to make the most accurate prediction about where the robot is from these, we call it noisy data. And so that becomes a really, really difficult underwater, especially because we don't have GPS. And so we have to rely on what's called propeller counting, which is like counting the number of spins of the propeller and trying to predict how viscous the water is and how, using, I said, the inertial sensors, which is like the acceleration on the robot, to try to fuse all that data together in a principled way to recover what we call the state, which is like where the robot actually is. And yeah, we use a lot of linear algebra. I mean, all aspects of robotics use a lot of linear algebra, because we try to represent like the state of the robot as like a matrix, and then we do like operations in that matrix to figure out what's going to happen to the robot when we do stuff.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's all the questions I have.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming. If there's anything else you want to talk about, we still have some time. If there's questions afterward, that you think of, you can email Chris or me. I can put our emails in the chat